But welcome everybody. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button.
I remember in middle school when you felt self-conscious if you were the last one to go through puberty. That really went topsy-turvy, didn't it?
Sometimes the Hasbara, it's too much explaining yourself and it's too apologetic.
Be sure to hit the notifications bell.
I actually do believe Israel won't just bomb countless civilians.
Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to put this up on your Facebook.
You have to be kind to people. Be kind to the guys in this mess in the first place.
Put this up on your Reddit.
Chile is a country.
Be sure to cut and paste a link to this to go into your favorite Facebook chat group.
It's good to see so many normal people in here.
Now, spanking isn't just my deep, dark personal secret. It's America's deep, dark secret.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere.
Put this on WhatsApp. Put this on Telegram. Put this on your favorite messenger app.
Hello and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel. I'm your host, an Untitled Anarchist Seagull called Elise. And it's been a week, so it appears that possibly this time a ceasefire agreement may be for real, though we should be a little bit more careful on that because the Israeli War Cabinet, who has rejected every single ceasefire with U.S. support, every other time still has to vote on it, and Ben Gvir in particular, who you'll remember if you aren't following up on the names of all of the ghouls in charge of the Zionist regime, he's the one who looks like the dodgy uncle who at your bat mitzvah went and groped your best friend. That's him, though. That one. Well, he's chucking his toys out the pram over the idea because he understands, like anyone paying attention understands, that the fact that Israel is being leaned on now, actually, to accept a Palestinian proposal from, like, a year ago, is a huge defeat for them in every single respect, and actually pretty fucking humiliating. But, so they still have to vote on it. They could, and as they're waiting, they're just still massacring people, so like, this is not a time to let up, and certainly a time to continue paying attention. Meanwhile, the TikTok ban has happened, and now all of a sudden, large numbers of people in the US are starting to actually get to know the rest of the world, and also find out how to pronounce Xiaohongshu, which for some reason is translated as Red Notes, but it actually literally translates as Little Red Book, like the Mao one. And I like that better because you can abbreviate it to LRB and nobody will know whether you're saying that you saw something in the London Review of Books or Chinese TikTok. But I mean, you just have to love the fact that they banned an app because it was owned by a guy from Singapore. And Singapore is kind of like China, they're the same part of the world or some bullshit. And so they banned the app, and so the response of the users is to go over to the one that actually is Chinese. I just kind of like that. I've also set up a dedicated Instagram, closer to home now, for the crowdfunded translation project. Well, come to my stream tomorrow. Because I'm showing all sorts of ways. Let me see, where's it? Profil. You can use how-to videos, tutorial content on YouTube as a means of language learning. It is an extremely effective method if you know what you're looking for, and I go through and show exactly what you need to be looking for and give examples of really good content. Meanwhile, I have a dedicated Instagram now for the crowdfunded translation projects and stuff like that I've set up that I think has a very cool logo. And the second part of my conversation with Corinne Green, trans policy advocate, on why all these major LGBT advocacy organizations in the US, you know, your HRCs, your fucking Lambda Legals, your A4TEs are absolutely fucking useless. Oh yeah, I mean, Duolingo, it's worth noting, even before AI, that was like the exact opposite of what is known to be an effective language learning method. But on my 4:30 to 7 o'clock stream on Hyperpolyglotting with Elise, we talk about the stuff that that actually is like proven to work. And so I thought, so the second part of that interview was up, and I thought we'd just take a quick look at a little bit of that before we get started here. Been in this particular cinematic universe for a while, and so I'm kind of curious, how do you think this works? Why do you think that you have this situation where the leadership seem to be much more concerned with getting Democrats elected no matter what they actually do than they seem to be with actually making sure that politicians do the right thing for the community that the shingle that they've hung out says they represent? What do you think? How do you think that's working?
So, well, I don't think it's working at all, which I think is
by what measure? Yes, true.
So I kind of have this in kind of three discrete-ish buckets, right?
Okay.
And so the first bucket is the funding bucket. So where the funding for the organization's work comes from and how much of it there is.
You've been in this particular cinematic universe for a while, and so I'm kind of curious.
And helping Trump win, just like all the stupid arguments, hurting Democratic turnout, sucked on trans rights.
Working.
Then they kind of felt that if they dared to criticize Dems, if they dared to admit that Joe Biden sucked on trans rights, or Kamala Harris sucked on trans rights.
Here's the full interview you can find here.
That they would be hurting Democratic turnout and helping Trump win, just like all the stupid arguments you saw on Twitter for a year.
I kind of saw where everything was going during the victory speech, because there was this audible hesitation when he was talking about, he was listing various sort of categories, and then there was this audible hesitation before he said, and transgender. Not pause for emphasis, more like pause for, am I really gonna do this? Okay, so I just dropped the link to that in chat. And good on you for getting the legal name change through and all that stuff, and the library card. That's great news. Hey Riveroon, hey Adria, you watched that year-end thing several times. That thing was long. Like, I mean, even after I edited it heavily, it was still coming to like 3.5 hours, and I was like, okay, fuck it. I'd actually seen something on there where apparently people like long watches on YouTube now. There's a tendency because people don't want to have to go look for something else. So I was like, okay, fuck it. This one will be a nice long one, and it'll have what I hope are some of the best moments, most memorable moments in the past year. So glad you liked it. Now, last week we were watching Cenk in an interview with a dickhead called Chris Williamson, talking about how the left continues to eat itself. And apparently not in the enjoyable way, like the happy Ouroboros way. More a sad Ouroboros. And it was shithouse, and there's still a fair bit of that left, so we could continue with that. We've also got Pim Tool slams TikTok over Chinese manipulation and influence, pushing woke ideology to destroy the U.S. It's like, why are you slamming it? It's already fucking banned. You don't need to slam it anymore, Tim? So, I mean, I was kind of wanting to continue with Cenk. If that's cool with everyone else, I think that is what we'll do. But there are a bunch of others we can switch over if this gets too repetitive or anything. Gonna move it back a little bit so we can remind ourselves what horrible bullshit we left out on. This was good. It was good in that very pathetic sort of a way. This is where Cenk explains that he's so ecstatic because fucking Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. replied to his tweets. Like, most people in the world would immediately question whether they had blocked the right people if they got a reply from either of those two motherfuckers. But Cenk is so fucking happy. And he's sure that this means good things are gonna happen.
And so he's like, okay, yeah, Sheldon gave me a lot of money, and so I moved the embassy. No, you're not supposed to give away foreign policy to a donor. Sorry. And then he gave Miriam Adelson the Presidential Medal of Freedom. For what, brother? Come on.
For what does anyone fucking get it? Bono got the thing. Hillary Clinton got it. George W. Bush got it. Like, there's two classified... I decided to go through, like, and see recipients of the Presidential Medal of Freedom when the list of this year's recipients came out, just to see whether... what it broke down to, and it's like artists and shitheads. And occasionally shithead artists, like Bono.
And for what? That's like our highest honor, and you're giving it to a donor's wife? So now...
That's kind of how it works.
What's important is not the past, but right now. So he appointed 4 people that are Team Miriam. Marco Rubio at State, Elise Stefanik as UN Ambassador, Mike Huckabee as Ambassador to Israel, and Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor. All 4 of those are neocons. They're war hawks, and they want more war, not less war.
No
that
shit.
That is not what the base voted for.
Like, who? He's really surprised by this.
That is Team Israel versus Team America.
No, it isn't, because there is no separate Team Israel. Team Israel is just like the fucking... Okay, I made a joke a while ago, and I need to kind of call it back here. That TERFs don't actually have individual genitals. They just have one collective genital, and it is called a glinner. Well, as TERFs, so too do countries. And the United States has a glinner too, and it's called Israel. Like, their capital and the U.S. capital cannot be separated. They're totally fucking commingled. There is really no boundary between them. I mean, Israel is full of U.S. citizens at all levels of government, including, like, the fucking prime minister.
I'm keeping it real. And by the way, I say the same exact things about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. They totally sold us out because AIPAC gave over $11 million to Joe Biden throughout his career. It's his #1 donor. They've given different groups...
Well, yeah, and of course Joe Biden, the guy who said that Ronald Reagan was too pro-Palestinian, was totally going to be on Team Free Palestine if it hadn't been for that AIPAC money. Oh, good to hear it, Phoenix. Great news.
So given over $10 million now, $5 million from AIPAC, $6 million from J Street to Kamala Harris. That's why they were willing to lose Michigan and the entire election rather than defy their donors. So, now,
like, on literally every issue, though, Cenk, that's not just AIPAC. That's oil and gas. That's the fucking insurance industry. Like, the whole reason the Democrats have this kind of trouble, I say it every time because it just keeps being true and it can't be repeated enough, is because they would rather lose voters and lose elections than lose money. the Democratic Party is a big fucking grift. Like, look at, I mean, it's just become even more shameless in the past year with these fucking fundraising. And, like, anytime there's some sort of big fucking disgrace in the Democratic Party, it's like 5 minutes later, you get 20 fucking fundraising emails. Would you send us $50? Would you send us $15? Would you send us $50? We need $15. I mean, they, like, went into Hawk to, in the fucking Joyful Politics convention to pay a bunch of, like, 1990s nostalgia music acts without making sure that they could cover payroll, and then they immediately stuck their hands out again. I mean, it's a fucking MLM pretending to be a political party at this point.
Now, proof's going to be in the pudding. So that's one of his donors. I can give you many other examples. Now, when you turn to Elon, to your question...
Well, yeah, and not a single one of these examples should be at all encouraging, Cenk. That's the point. It's capitalist assholes all the way down.
Well, so on the one hand, he's more transparent about it. That's good. That's true, right? The Koch brothers hid in the shadows, and the right would argue, and I think there's some truth to it.
Yeah, incidentally, when we talk about the Koch brothers, I mean, there's been all this, like, whole thing about Facebook, stop fact-checking. Guess who was one of the main funders of their so-called independent fact-checking network for the U.S.? It was the fucking Koch brothers. Like, their fact-checkers, the funding behind their fact-checkers was MAGA as shit. And that shouldn't surprise anyone, because Facebook started out as a creepy misogynist website to rate female students as how hot they were. And then it went on when it became like a proper social media platform. It ended up being just a haven for fucking Holocaust deniers and neo-Nazis and shit. And the only thing that really stopped, that led to any kind of moderation on that stuff was simply that they needed advertising, and the advertisers weren't having it. They couldn't, like, have their stuff being advertised next to a fucking, Facebook group called Hitler Did Nothing Wrong or some shit. So, I mean, there's all this talk about, like, all these, like, billionaires who could ruin Trump in an afternoon without actually really cracking much of a sweat, just by calling up his debts. Buying up his debts and calling him in, and he'd be fucked. Like, that they're all just kissing the ring, when actually they're taking an opportunity. And in the case of Facebook, Chad Loder was pointing out, like, this move of the moderation team from California to Texas, a bunch of other things. It's a great way to disguise layoffs. It's a great way to disguise a so-called reduction in force. Oh, we're just moving. Well, wow, you're saying that a whole bunch of people can't make the move to Texas, and both because that costs a lot of money and because Texas is a horror show? Wow, that's interesting. So I guess we can, like, cut our payroll pretty substantially without having to comply with federal layoff rules.
George Soros was in the shadows, right? And a lot of times the right will say, oh, yeah, would you ban George Soros' money from politics? And I'm like, yeah, of course I would. And they're like, oh, yeah, would you ban union money from politics? Of course I would.
Well, fuck you. Like, there is literally, that's liberalism right there. The idea, okay, now I'm not going to pretend that, the existing trade unions in the U.S., especially their leadership, are great, or are revolutionary organizations of the working class, but they are about the most democratic organizations the working class in the U.S. has access to. And that is just not the same thing. So, like, if you're banning, like, union money, the money of the working class from politics, that simply is that does not follow that you should do that if you're going to ban, like, fucking capitalists. And all this stuff is pointless, because you can ban all the money from politics. As long as capitalists own the economy, it doesn't make a difference. Like, plenty of countries have stricter campaign finance laws than the U.S. The outcomes aren't qualitatively better. Oh, yum. That sounds really good, Adria. I love good bread.
I would ban all money from politics. That's the point. I don't want to cheat. And so that's the difference between a genuine populist and a partisan, right?
What the I mean, okay, now there's a genuine populist. I mean, populist was already a bullshit term that means basically nothing. It's a way to whitewash fascists and to, like, try to lump leftists in with them. But now there's a genuine populist. See, he's a genuine populist because he wants to ban, like, the workers' money as much as the capitalist money from politics. Like, that even makes any fucking sense.
So now Elon has a lot of interests, right? Let's keep it real. He and one of the people, and
I don't
when he's
think he knows
doing
what keep it real
efficiency
means.
in the government, if he gets rid of every regulator who regulates his businesses, that's super fishy, right? So
you think? You think that might be fishy? In fact, here's the thing. Because deregulation has been the watchword of the U.S. regulatory system for over a generation now, for like since the 1970s, late 1970s under Carter. But they never actually get rid of it altogether, and there's a reason that they don't do that. It's because the ruling class understands that it's actually useful to them to have the impression that there's somebody, that there's like a ref out there who's going to make sure it's all above board. If you get rid of that, like, I mean, same thing like with, say, the CDC. I mean, the CDC has been, like, officially just on the, the COVID, the American Society for the Protection of SARS-CoV-2 viruses. Okay. But you would, so you might as well not have a CDC in that regard for all the good they've done in the middle of this pandemic. But if you get rid of it, then who's going to convince people that it's under control? Then there's nobody at the wheel. There's not even the appearance of somebody at the wheel. And then people might actually start to say, okay, we got to just sort this stuff out on our own because nobody's coming to save us. And the illusion that somebody's coming to save us is kind of an important part of the way social control works in this society.
So is he going to do that or is he not going to do that? And, you know, and even Trump, he said it in one of the rallies because he can't help himself. He said, I used to be against electric vehicles, but Elon gave me a very strong endorsement, so now I'm pro-electric.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just a reminder that, yeah, Elon Musk, if Elon Musk woke up with Trump's money, he would fucking cry.
Brother, you're not supposed to say it out loud.
I mean, and I will say that is like one of the accidentally useful things about Trump. He says the quiet part out loud. He does not, for whatever reason, whether it's just incompetence, whether he just can't help himself, or what, he will give the real, like, the quiet reason for why things are happening, for why a particular policy is a particular way, rather than coming up with the one for polite society.
Hey, so I'm hoping against hope that right-wing populists actually hold them to account. And my side thinks I'm a sucker for that.
Yes, because you're a sucker, Cenk. I mean, you've been a sucker for the Dems, now you're a sucker for Trump. I mean, you're just an all-day sucker.
And that right-wing populism is not genuine.
Well, no, I mean, it is genuine. It is genuinely fascism.
It's all fraudulent. They're all going to do whatever Trump and Elon says.
That actually, I mean, that isn't really the argument. I mean, I guess that's probably some people are making that argument, but the main argument is you're getting into bed with a bunch of Nazis, and that's not a good thing.
So we'll find out, and their actions will tell us who was right and who was wrong.
I've heard you talk about, just sort of leaning back into the criticisms that occur internally, and I do think that you're right. The right's not particularly good at taking criticism in the past, but recently it seems to be at least prepared to have the argument. But I've heard you
have what argument? Like, could you give an example of that?
Like something I've noticed too, which is the Democratic leadership finding it offensive if you ask them hard questions.
Like what? I mean, yeah, and the thing is, I'm not even disagreeing, but I want to know what he thinks is a hard question and what he thinks finding it offensive is.
It's sort of, what are you doing? Like, are we not on the same side? Which obviously...
Well, this is literally, he's describing literally what Cenk does. This is literally what Cenk does when people criticize him from his left.
He doesn't allow you to sharpen your sword particularly well, because you can actually do it constructively in a way that's aiming to improve and move toward things, speaking the same language, with the same goals, the same outcomes, etc.
You'd break Cenk's sword on butter at this point.
But yeah, the fact that it's not taken well. Internal criticism and difficult questions aren't taken well.
See, this is the whole maddening thing. I mean, and this is... See, the whole point of a decent interviewer, whether it's adversarial or whether it's even somebody who's on, like, the same general side and is actually on board with all your points, a good interviewer is gonna, push you to give examples, to be very specific about what you're talking about, so that people can actually get a feel for what you mean, rather than speaking in all sorts of vague terms. But this guy is as content to avoid actually talking about anything concrete and identifiable. He's as keen on avoiding that as Cenk is.
Yeah, there's two elements to that. So one is they believe that the role of the media is to do marketing for them. So anyone who doesn't do marketing for corporate politicians overall, but now it's mainly become corporate Democrats.
No, well, I mean, and the thing is, the role of the media is that. I mean, there's a great book on it. It's called Manufacturing Consent. It came out in the 80s. And it's all about how that is the main role of the mass media. Because they're owned by the same people who own kind of everything else. They represent the exact same interests as are represented in any other boardroom, and they operate as a propaganda system, and they filter out information that is, harmful to the overall propaganda narrative that is useful at a given time, and they focus on the stuff that's useful. I mean, that's precisely why Blinken and Romney, they had that talk at, what was it, Davos? I forget where it was, but they were talking about the TikTok ban, and they were both talking about how, the reason you had to ban TikTok is that all the other U.S.-based, social media platforms understood that you had to shut down any kind of accurate information or like support for Palestinians. And TikTok wasn't doing that, and it was causing problems because people were seeing what was going on rather than being stuck with the standard propaganda narrative. And so they banned it.
They find that to be deeply offensive. And unfortunately, they've trained a lot of Democratic voters to find it offensive.
I mean, what's wild is Cenk is talking about a role that he also plays. I mean, what he's saying here is not at all inconsistent with, like, the official line of the Democratic Party right now. I mean, starting in the campaign when they were, like, totally trying to win over moderate Nazis. And it didn't work because it turns out even moderate Nazis aren't going to vote for a black woman.
So when I criticize the Biden administration, I get pushback from actual Democratic voters saying, no, Cenk, you're supposed to say only positive things about them.
Like, criticize what exactly? I mean, again, for example.
Don't say anything critical, because that'll hurt our chance of beating Trump. They've trained their own voters to believe in propaganda.
I mean, he does the same thing. Like, when you criticize him from the left, he will do the exact same thing. In fact, that's why his line because he's been getting criticized a lot because he's been sucking up to Nazis and stuff and saying horrible transphobic and racist shit. And when people say, wait a second, Cenk, that's fucked up, that's actually really a bad thing you're saying, like, trans people are kind of under attack right now, and it would be good if you didn't try to stick the boot in, at that particular moment. And he's like, no, this is a circular firing squad. You're dividing the left.
As a concept. And I love Democratic voters. And so I want to snap them out of it. I want to say,
you love them? They're like 70 odd million of them. Like, I got people in my own family I couldn't say that about. And he's going to say that about 70 million people, most of whom he's never going to meet?
hey guys, you guys are generally kind-hearted folks who want to look out for other people. But you cannot have this ideology of no criticism. Because if you do...
What ideology of no criticism? Like, criticism of what, Cenk? Can you give an example?
Do no criticism of your leaders, you will have very shitty leaders. Okay? They will get...
Yeah, well, what do you mean will? Why do we need the future tense for this? We've been having some pretty fucking shitty leaders.
Absolutely. Power corrupts, absolutely. And it'll make your side weaker and weaker and weaker. And so for 10 straight years, I've been arguing for stronger primaries. Actually, way longer than that.
What makes a primary stronger?
But it's I say the last 10 years because...
Like, what the hell is does that mean primaries that actually meet the minimum international standards of free and fair elections where everybody votes on the same day for the same slate of candidates and there's none of this bullshit where, like, candidates get to just trade votes and shit? Like, what the hell is a strong primary?
They had the ideology of, no, we will anoint a leader, and democratic leadership is geniuses playing four-dimensional chess. And
who was saying this? Like, he's just, like, attributing this to Democratic voters. I mean, this is certainly the sort of thing that Democrats, like, propagandists in the media were saying. You know, the same people who were saying that there was absolutely no reason, just because he was extremely unpopular and couldn't seem to, like, come up with a single unscripted sentence that made any sense, that didn't mean that you shouldn't run Joe Biden again. You know, those people were saying it, but that's not Democratic voters. That's like media talking heads, like Cenk, actually. I don't remember anyone... I don't remember there being some popular outcry, no, we don't want to actually, get a choice of who replaces Joe Biden. That was something that came from on high. The direction from which Cenk also comes to us.
Swear to God, they would literally say that to me. They're playing four-dimensional chess. Your little mind can't understand it.
Who would literally say this to you, Cenk?
Okay, so we pick the one who's the most pro-corporate and who's, pleasure the donors the most. And that is the anointed leader who has the best chance of winning. And then they send every robot on MSNBC, best chance of winning, best chance of winning, best chance. And then, but Bernie's like, he went from 1% to 48% in a miraculous run with no media coverage. That was unbelievable, right? So how about that? That looked...
Well, yeah, but they didn't... As like Cenk has kind of already pointed out, they'd rather lose elections than donors. Which is why Sanders is never going to be the guy. And he knows he's never going to be the guy. It's why he never seriously tries to be the guy. He does his thing, he gets people all excited, and it's like, holy shit, the Democrats might be changing or something like that. And it's like, no, they're not. He's just Lucy with a football.
Looks successful. No, he has no chance of winning. He is not our corporate robot, has no chance of winning, right? And
and of course the thing is, they know perfectly well it isn't that he has no chance of winning. He's like the only actually reasonably popular Democrat in federal politics in the U.S. From polling. The problem is he has a really good chance of winning. It's the same reason that there was so much money spent within the Labour Party to try to, like, take Corbyn down. Because Corbyn... I mean, everyone talks about the fucking landslide that Keir Starmer got, which was mostly due to, like, clever manipulation of, which seats they campaigned in. But in terms of the total number of votes, Keir didn't get anywhere near as many votes as Corbyn did. It's just that they were distributed in the right way, and so it equaled a huge number of seats. Because the British electoral system is also bullshit.
Voters are good people to believe that bullshit, right? So I'm trying to snap them out of it. And one of the things that I point to is they're like, no, we should have no primaries. We should just have an anointing and a cheerleading. And you're
like,
ruining.
Who is he saying? He's claiming this is the base that said this? If the base were saying this, then Harris would have won this election.
The cheerleading, Jay. Okay, how'd that work out for us? Because in 2016...
I love that YouTube gives us the option to listen to dickheads talking as if they were shit-faced.
ESC did everything they could, including illegally funneling money to Hillary Clinton's campaign through the state parties to make sure that it was Hillary Clinton and not Bernie Sanders, right? And they did as small a primary as they possibly could. And then on the Republican side, there was a free-for-all. You remember the old, I don't know if they still do it in WWE, but where everybody's in the ring and then they...
the Royal Rumble?
Royale. What's that?
Is it a Royal Rumble or Battle Royale?
Yeah, both of those. And when they started calling the Royal Rumble, you got to throw everybody out of the ring, right? And it's...
I mean, I like the concept. I love the idea of a ring with, like, Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders and fucking Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and all of them, and then we get to, like, chuck them out of the ring. I think we should have that. I think it would be great, and I think it would promote more flexibility and mobility in the party leadership.
One against all. And that's what 2016 was, and Trump came out of it. And I keep asking them, like, super simple question. Can you remind me who won in 2016? Oh, right, Donald Trump won in 2016. The Republicans won in 2016.
Well, yes, they lost the popular vote, though. I mean, they did get 3 million fewer votes. Because the thing is, Hillary Clinton is still a better candidate than Hillary Clinton plus genocide, which is what they decided to run on in 2024.
16, after they had a super tough, and I would argue vicious primary. In 2020, there's no primary on the Republican side, but there's a significant primary with 27 Democrats on the Democratic side. Democrats win. So in this case...
Well, yeah, but that's not why Democrats won. It's not, and that's not to do with the primary. In fact, I mean, that primary was dodgy as hell. Because unlike 2016, where Sanders like came from behind and nobody's really expecting anything, because Sanders, these days everybody knows who he is, really. But in 2016, like 2015, 2016, that wasn't yet the case. Like terminally online leftists and people from Vermont knew who he was, and basically nobody else. Which is why you get this polling that like right-wing Democrats would show at the time that was like, yeah, actually, it's only white people like Sanders. But actually, what that was polling from very early in the campaign, when overwhelmingly the only people who'd even heard of the man were from fucking Burlington, Vermont. By the time the campaign was over, his support had actually diversified quite a bit. And he, at the beginning of the 2020 primary, Sanders started out way ahead. The thing had to be worded in a whole new fucking way in order to have it come out the way the leadership wanted. The reason that, the leadership picked a shithead candidate that nobody really liked, that nobody really wanted, and nobody was voting for when they had an actual choice in the primary. But the thing is, after 4 years of Trump, people wanted something different. And so he was what it was. And now, I mean, that is the main sort of mechanism of electoral politics in this country, and to some extent in other places as well that I can think of. Where it's like, somebody gets elected, nobody really liked him to begin with. By the time their term of office is over, people are so comprehensively sick of him, they want somebody else. or they're just so sick of the fucking process that they'll just decide to just continue with this same asshole for another 4 years. But either way, it's not because anyone actually likes them.
They cancel the primary. They say the guy with dementia is the anointed one, and don't tell anyone that his brain is melting. Oh my God.
Which is wild because, like, polling was showing that people were seriously concerned about that. Huge numbers of people were seriously concerned about that all the way back in 2020.
Guys, he shakes hands with invisible people. We all already know his brain is melting. There isn't enough propaganda in the world to get people to believe that Joe Biden is mentally healthy.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, yeah, that's all true. Yeah, it's all true. I mean, but your guy, like Donald, that is not something that you can. That's not a charge you can acquit Donald Trump of. The man's incoherent as fuck too. Put the two of them in a fucking ring, and it's like you've got like ChatGPT and Stockfish having a rap battle.
And they're like, no, there is. And then he goes out and he's like, oh, my uncle was eaten by a cannibal. I'm like,
that wasn't a new lie, incidentally. He's been telling that one for decades.
I mean, if you can't recognize that this brother is in bad shape, you're trying to deny reality, and it is such a dumb strategy. Forget that it's wrong and it's immoral to lie like that, etc.
Well, what about the genocide, Cenk? Because that turns out, I mean, there's even more polling coming out that is confirming what the appearance that a lot of polling was giving during the election, namely that what led a lot of Democrats, a lot of like supporters of Democrats to stay home was that they are sick of the Democrats committing genocide and they didn't want to endorse it.
If you want to win, you don't want your candidate's brain falling out of his ear. Like, this is not complicated. And
yet the Republicans had the guy with the brain falling out of the ear too, and they won this time. And you decided, despite the fact that they obviously won by default and way more people didn't vote for him than did, you decided that you're gonna fucking go kiss the ring and crow about how Elon Musk replied to you on Twitter.
I had such blow-ups with Alan Lichtman because even after the debate, the professor with the keys. He came on the Young Turks. He's like, no, Biden's the right guy. I'm like, he said he wanted to destroy Medicare by accident.
No, he didn't. He didn't say that. He said he beat Medicare. He had, over his entire career, said that he wanted to destroy Medicare and Social Security on purpose because he's always been Wall Street's man.
You think that that's the right guy? And he's like, no, the keys decide. Always go with the incumbent. Always go with the establishment guy, Joe Biden. I'm like, okay, look, if you guys are going to be lunatics, I'm not on board for that, right? And so I challenged Biden in the primary. We had a petition 14 months ago to get him the hell out of the race. So that kind of, you must cheerlead, you must do marketing, you must do propaganda. I despise it, and that is why we're oil and water. Like the establishment Democrats probably hate me.
I don't buy that for a second.
More than they hate any Republican.
No. I don't buy that, because the thing is, what he's doing, the line that he's giving here, I mean, he's trying to act, because it's his brand, it's his marketing, is that he's like this, like, anti-establishment truth teller who just happens to be, like, maybe 1 or 2 degrees to the right or to the left of the Democratic Party leadership, depending on what's going on. I mean, all he's done is follow the exact line that party leadership is following.
If you said to them, you're forced to go to lunch with Cenk or Trump, I think every one of them picks Trump.
I mean, maybe. I don't know, though, because, I mean, if it's Trump, they're probably going to fucking McDonald's.
They're like, oh, fuck Cenk. No. I don't want any piece of that guy.
Yeah, I was listening to The Rest is Politics. They did a number of postmortems, I guess, after the election, trying to break down what was going on. They had this guy on, I can't remember who it was, but he worked with Trump during his first administration, and he was telling us...
I'm going to skip over a few things. Yeah, I mean, this is quite long. We're going to move over to Cenk's postmortem on the election.
Now that the dust's settled, we're a few weeks hence from the election. What's your sort of post-mortem being able to tie everything together now the fog of war's fucked off? Do you think this was more a right victory or a left loss? Where's your sort of head fallen on this?
Yeah, I think it's actually super clear. People voted for change. They almost always vote for change because the neoliberal system, sometimes they call it neoliberal, sometimes I call it corporate rule. It's basically the same thing. Corporations have gained so much power, which, by the way, in my book, Justice Coming, I explained.
I mean, what he just said there isn't wrong. Pretty much any time you ask people in polls over like the past few decades if they'd like to see things really just change in a fundamental way, I mean, which is a vague question, of course, but that generally gets a lot of support. People want something different.
The founding fathers did the American Revolution not just against the British Empire, but against the British East India Company, right? So the Boston Tea Party was not against the British government. It was against that corporation. They went and threw them.
Yeah, but that corporation was just the long arm of the British state.
Their tea overboard because they were tired of their bullshit, right? And so the founding fathers kept warning us, be careful with corporations.
Yeah, no, they didn't. God, like, this guy went to law school. He should have some, and he went to fucking business school. He should know something about the history of the concept of the corporation in the U.S. And the thing is, the concept of the corporation, as we know it was not around when any of the founding aristocrats were still alive. That is very much a late 19th century development. The corporations as they existed in the time of like fucking George Washington and them were for the most part small and temporary entities. They would have a specific project that they were doing. They were going to build a bridge or something like that, and then when the bridge was built, the corporation was dissolved. Corporations as we know them now are very much a late 19th century, early 20th century development. So no, fucking like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, none of these motherfuckers were warning about corporations as we know them, because corporations as we know them would not have been on their radar at all at that time.
Because they will accumulate so much money and so much power, they will use it to choke off democracy. And they were exactly right? So that's what's happened.
These motherfuckers, the founding fathers themselves were people who accumulated huge amounts of money and power and used it to prevent democracy because they were terrified of it, and they openly said so.
Across the world. So people are like, I don't get it. Brazil's going left, then right, then left. And Argentina's going extreme left, extreme right. I don't know.
No, it hasn't gone extreme left. Fucking Fernandez was not extreme left. He was actually a right-wing social democrat. And Milei won because of a fluke. Nobody expected Massa to be the candidate. Massa stepped in kind of at the last minute because I forget who it was who was going to run before it ended up being Massa. But he had to step back over something. I forget exactly what the deal was. But the thing is, Massa was like just another sort of right-wing social democrat, kind of neoliberal dickhead, and the result was that, Milei squeaked by, basically. And you look at, like, for example, Brazil, the reason that Bolsonaro got in is because Lula was illegally prevented from standing in that election. Nobody seriously thinks that Lula would have lost that election if he'd have been allowed to stand in it, but he didn't. And so, like, the people who would have voted for Lula, which is, like, a huge number of people, really kind of didn't have any one place to go, and so Bolsonaro ended up taking it. And what you see, actually, in a lot of places, is this exact same sort of configuration in elections, where you have like the fascist toilet monster on the one side who freaks everybody out and actually tends to cause liberals to freak out enough that they start actually kind of looking towards leftists and maybe even listening to us sometimes. And you have what I like to call the diazepam, who's just the sort of boring, middle of the road, kind of like socially liberal, whatever the hell that means, you know, but is kind of just shitty on everything else. And they are much more useful, and they tend to get a lot more money in these elections precisely because they have the advantage of causing divisions. It is actually, that makes them the candidates of stability. Whereas, you know, people like Milei, people like Trump, people like fucking Cast, or Bolsonaro, or any of those motherfuckers, they unite people against themselves. Because they, you know, their election is an alarm bell, and huge numbers of people immediately come out and want to stop them somehow, want to prevent, you know, them doing too much damage or whatever.
Understand what's happening. I can clear it up for you. They're voting against the incumbents. They're voting against the establishment. They're voting against corporate rule. So, and they're doing it all across the world.
Well, except that's not exactly what's happening. It's not that they're voting against it. It's that they're staying home. The Democrats, and this is another thing you can't say often enough, the Democrats aren't competing with the Republicans for votes. The Republicans and Democrats get their votes from totally different demographics for the most part. There's very little overlap there. The Democrats are competing with abstention. When they manage to convince a whole lot of working class people who otherwise would have stayed home because they don't see any particular upside in the process for themselves, then Democrats win, because there are way more people who would at least theoretically vote for Democrats than there are people who ever vote for Republicans.
So in this case, Kamala Harris was actually, have already forgotten this. There was a brief window when she was up in the polling by about 7 points. Now the polling turned out to be wrong by about 3 or 4 points. It wasn't off by 30 or 40. It was off by 3 or 4. So in that window, she actually could have won the election if they had held the election that day. So why was she popular back then? And then
okay, and I mean, I'm interested because there is something to this, and actually you can say similar things about Tim Walz, because like very early on, you had like Harris talking about things like price controls. She was talking about keeping Khan over at the FTC, who has actually done a few decent things. Like she's issued guidance. I haven't checked to see exactly how much, you know, it would stand up in court, saying that the antitrust laws do not prevent freelancers like myself from collectively bargaining and forming unions and shit. I mean, and she was going to keep, she had initially said she was going to keep Khan on, and she was talking price controls and stuff like that, and that was popular. That was, you know, that was the sort of thing people needed to hear, especially if she was going to continue committing genocide. You know, there had to be at least some kind of upside on offer. And very quickly, she abandoned that. And it was similar with Tim Walz. Like, he started out talking, I mean, his whole thing was like, you know, saying, you know, all these right-wingers who are obsessed with children's genitals are weird. And people responded very well to that, because it is kind of fucking weird and creepy as hell. And he was calling it out in a way that, you know, very quickly, very easily, and it resonated with a lot of people because it didn't take all that much to see where he was going with it. And, like, then her handlers got him in a room at some point to prep him for debate, and that was, like, the end of anything that at all resonated with the people whose votes they needed.
And she lost all of her popularity.
Yeah.
Well, because she came out with populist positions in the beginning. She said, I'm going to end price gouging by these sons of bitch corporations. I'm going to go after what they're doing on housing, and I'm going to lower the prices of housing.
Yeah, I mean, her housing thing was mostly a gift to developers. But, like, the price controls thing, she had initially used the word price controls. And, yeah.
I'm going to pick Tim Walz, and I know a lot of the right wing now have problems with Tim Walz, but Tim Walz was a populist in Minnesota that passed paid family leave, et cetera, et cetera.
He's just kind of leaving out the trans rights stuff that he passed. I mean, Tim Walz was also the guy who sent the National Guard out to, like, attack Black Lives Matter in 2020. But he's going to leave out the trans rights stuff?
So she started out in a great direction, strategically.
I mean, and I can tell you why he's leaving out the trans rights stuff here. Because the thing is that the period when Walz was resonating really well with the people whose votes they need was also the time when he was attacking the people he's sucking up to now and saying that they're weird and it's kind of creepy how they're so obsessed with people's genitals. But if he admits that, then he has to admit that he's not like tracking the popular sentiment by like throwing trans people under the bus along with the Democratic Party leadership. It's worth noting. I mean, Biden, declared open season on trans people, and it cost him no political capital because the fucking LGBT watchdog groups that are supposed to like nominally hold these assholes accountable didn't say a thing about it. They just kept sucking up to him. But he's not going to say all that, because if he points all that out, then he's pointing out that when Tim Walz was really popular was when he was taking positions that Cenk is trying to claim you can't possibly support because they're just too idiosyncratic.
And Biden was down 8, she's up 7. Holy shit, she gained 15.
I mean, there's also the fact that people were just relieved that it wasn't going to be Biden.
Points nationally, which is so hard. And then her moron, corrupt brother-in-law, Tony West, who's a corporate lawyer for Uber, was like, no, I got a great idea. Let's go kiss corporate ass. So he...
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it was just her brother-in-law. If it weren't for her brother-in-law, she totally never would have done that. Like, I mean...
convinced her to put out a letter saying that 90 corporate CEOs were on her side. And he convinced her to put Mark Cuban all over cable news. I got no beef with Mark Cuban. I have agreements...
Wait, why do you have no beef with Mark Cuban? I mean, he was one of the main people who really did not want that price controls thing that you just said that you were a fan of.
Disagreements with him, that's fine, right? But strategically, it was a massive mistake to put Cuban on cable news going, no, she loves big business. No, she loves corporations. No, don't worry.
I mean, don't forget how she, did the sort of Cenk thing where, Cenk is sucking up to, like, fucking Elon Musk and stuff, and she was bringing out Dick Cheney to campaign for her and shit. And it's like, yeah, that was a shitty idea. But the thing is, again, it's a bad strategy if the idea is to win. If the idea is to keep the donors happy, even if it occasionally means you lose, then it's an excellent strategy. She achieved it.
Stuff. She's going to let the corporations keep fucking, right? And then her lead evaporated. The whole she loves Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney. Are you guys idiots?
Well, I mean, do you think that was fake? I think it was quite sincere.
Cheney's last poll was at 13%. Who the hell do you think you're going to win with Dick Cheney? If they just can't get it through their heads. So
maybe they're not the ones who can't get it through their heads. Maybe they have different fucking priorities.
As soon as she turned around, Anna and I on the Young Turks started saying, terrible strategy. We're worried we're doomed, and that's exactly what happened.
How big of a deal do you think the woke stuff has been? Because everybody's heard 30%.
Oh, this will be great.
Of the Trump campaign budget went on this one ad, the most effective political ad in modern history, talking about they, them, and for you and us, which on the surface probably makes it feel like, well, that was a linchpin issue, or the linchpin.
But it wasn't really. Because the thing is, what happened now, the overwhelming majority of the population, including the majority of people who vote Republicans, actually thinks it's frightening that there's this obsession with hurting trans people. When you look at it specifically, people who vote for Democrats, support for trans rights is overwhelming. But Harris and various other Democrats who were attacked with ads like this did not respond to attacks on trans people by defending trans people. They responded by distancing themselves from trans people.
An issue. How much do you believe that?
Yeah, so at Young Turks we have total open minds. So
we can tell.
People to the left of me, I have people that are more establishment than me, and so we had this huge debate after the election. I was on the side of it made a difference. We had two other hosts that were more leftist than I am who said, no, the ad didn't make a difference. Okay, I'm going to have the same debate with my nephew, Hassan Piker. On Thanksgiving, we do a thing called Jenksgiving on his stream. And he's more of a leftist than I am, so we fight for an hour or two, and then we go eat Thanksgiving dinner.
No, so we're going to focus on the video and not the shithouse response from the Democrats.
Together, okay? So we're going to have that same fight. And the essence of that fight is they think, no, go maximalist position and say that, you know, every other president should be African-American, trans, disabled person.
Wait, literally nobody's saying this. And this is a key piece of the lie that is used to justify the fascist assault on trans people. The idea that advocating for maintaining the status quo, a status quo in which trans people have the right to receive health care, the right to use whatever public toilet is appropriate for their gender, the right to participate in organized sport, the right to, like, just generally participate in public life, at the very least on paper. That is the status quo position, but people like Cenk and Anna-transphobian and, like, Nazis try to present it as if it's a maximalist demand, because if they admit that what they're trying to do is strip away rights that trans people have had for a long time, then they're admitting that they're just doing a new version of the Nuremberg laws. So they make it look like it's a maximalist demand. It's the fucking status quo.
And we'll win all the elections. And I'm like, nah, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. And I had this huge fight with Hassan earlier about crime, and he's like, no, it's imaginary.
It is though. I mean, you can actually look, if you compare people's polling on, like, fear of crime to actual likelihood of them experiencing any crime in the areas they live in, what you find is they're completely out of whack. Like, the people who have the highest fear of crime are the people who are the least likely to experience any.
Like, okay, if you'd like to get your clock clean, tell the voters that they're imagining being in danger when they're actually in danger.
Yeah, I mean, this is literally the opposite of the reality. And it's the opposite of the polling, too. Because, like, I mean, he tries to act like there was some sort of huge groundswell grassroots opposition to the idea that maybe cops have too much fucking money. But the polls that people cite to defend that position don't say that. You know, there was, like, a poll that was trotted out to claim that, like, the black people opposed the idea of cutting police budgets and defunding them, and it didn't even ask them about that. It asked them whether they considered it important for their neighborhoods to be safe from whoever.
Okay, you're gonna get annihilated. And what happened? Prop 36 was a referendum basically on crime in California. In California, with massively Democratic voters. It passed with 70%.
In an election where there was huge abstention.
That is Democratic voters going, yes, there was crime.
No, it wasn't, though. That's not how that works. Because the thing is, the people who stay home are the people who will either not vote or vote for Democrats. The people who basically always go to the polls are the people who always see themselves as having interests in it, which is to say rich right-wingers. So when you run a campaign that completely suppresses, the turnout of people who support Democrats, you're going to exaggerate the level of participation of reactionaries.
Yes, we were pissed about it, and cut the shit out. Okay, move those misdemeanors back to felonies.
Why? I mean, like, literally, there's no justification for this other than more fucking slave labor in California. There's no evidence that that reduces crime. There's no evidence that that it has any kind of a positive impact or makes anything safer. The offenses that Prop 36 was about were not safety relevant offenses. It was like fucking petty property fucking crime and shit. Like, this is what he's saying is complete nonsense. But what he does is this thing that a certain annoying kind of guy does, which is where he will say complete nonsense, but will say it in a tone like it would be ridiculous for anyone to disagree with him.
We're not interested in domestic assault being lightly treated.
That's not what it was about.
Not interested in having our toothpaste locked up at a CVS, right?
Like, that's CVS's decision, and actually it turns out it's funny that he came out with this in the past, like, last week or whenever, because it turns out Walmart is starting to reverse all those things where they were locking up basic, like, necessities, because it turns out that the result of them locking up basic necessities is that people go and buy them elsewhere because nobody wants to fucking have to flag down an employee in order to pick up a fucking razor or a toothbrush or something.
This shit is real, okay? So now, but it connects though. It connects with our earlier conversation. Because the end of that trans ad was, okay, so that position is so extreme. And they don't get it. They think it's not extreme. No.
What position is so extreme? What position is so extreme, Cenk? Are you going to say what position you're talking about?
Asking me to pay for your surgery.
That's not an extreme position. That is literally what the 8th Amendment requires. That isn't even a new thing. That's been the law for over like 20 fucking years. That's why that was such a bullshit response. Like, I mean, when fucking Kamala Harris was asked, what do you think of, incarcerated trans people being allowed to have healthcare access? And she said, well, it's the law, I guess. I'm all for upholding the law. I mean, like Republicans say Republican Supreme Court nominees used to say when you would ask them about Roe versus Wade and shit. It is a bullshit. That is not an extreme demand. That is the fucking status quo. In fact, when Trump was doing that charm offensive around the concentration camps, like the specific concentration camp for trans women refugees, they made a point of talking about that they were complying with the existing law on access to transition-related health care. Like, this is not an extreme demand. It is literally the fucking status quo, Cenk. Because the alternative is literally torture.
When you're
like, what healthcare do you think? What other healthcare do you think we should like deny people who are incarcerated?
You're not a citizen yet. You're a detainee.
Well, yeah, because here's the thing about incarcerating people. It kind of limits their options for healthcare. They can't just go and do a GoFundMe and then go to the doctor of their choice. The only healthcare they have access to is the healthcare they can get in the concentration camp. So yeah, when you incarcerate people, you do take responsibility for their healthcare. That is just established law.
I got 1,000 priorities, and maybe
and which one of them is harmed by like incarcerated trans people being able to access healthcare, Cenk? Why does that have to be stripped away from people who are already having a much worse day than you've ever had?
We disagree on whether I would pay for that surgery if I had all the money in the world, right?
How much do you think it costs? They're not that many fucking trans people in the first place.
But we don't have all the money in the world. We don't even have paid family leave.
So you're saying, wait, the idea is that if we torture trans people in prisons and concentration camps, then we get paid family leave? Are you trying to claim that that's the dichotomy? Like, that's the only way we can do it? That the only reason we don't have paid family leave is that incarcerated trans people have the right to health care, motherfucker?
What are we doing giving surgery to prisoners?
They're prisoners. They're human beings. They have a right to fucking healthcare, you piece of shit.
Or detainees in that case. And
even more so, they're refugees. They shouldn't be locked up in the first place. There's no justification for locking them up. They're literally people who have been put into concentration camps because they're refugees, and the U.S. policy is to treat refugees like shit. Like...
Anyways, at the end of the ad, it says Kamala Harris is for they, them, and Trump is for us. See that?
Yeah, and everybody knows that the us in that ad is a very specific us.
Connects it back to populism.
No, it doesn't. Well, I mean, in the sense that it connects it back to fascism, yeah.
So Kamala Harris seems to be generically for they, them, whether it's an extreme position on trans rights.
Which it isn't. It literally isn't. And it isn't even her position. She actually went to court to try to take that right away from trans people, and she lost. Thank fuck she lost.
And by the way, I want to be clear. I'm 100% for trans rights.
Ooh. Yeah. Yeah, I can tell, Jack. You're totally 100% for trans rights, except for, like, the things that means.
Constitutional rights.
Well, that's funny that you should mention specifically constitutional rights, because the reason that incarcerated trans people have the right to health care access is because the courts have consistently ruled that the 8th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says you have to do that. So that's a constitutional right, and you're literally against it. You literally just came out against it. Jeez, shut the fuck up.
I am not for... I have a right to play in the WNBA. No, you don't.
Yeah, well, actually, yes, they do. I mean, again, this is another example. This isn't an extreme demand. Trans people have had the right to do this for decades. I mean, the thing to remember is that the minute they admit that, they have to admit that there's no evidence. Because the thing about sports, I mean, I don't know, Cenk, maybe he doesn't follow the sport. He doesn't do sports ball. But there's a neat thing in sports. It's called keeping score. And it means that it's really, really easy to tell if anyone has a fucking advantage at it. And it turns out, guess what? Trans women, because it's always about trans women, do not have an advantage. In fact, trans women are massively underrepresented in sports despite having had the right to participate in, like, professional sports at all levels, including the fucking Olympics, for decades. You know, if this is such a bullshit thing for him to pretend is such an extreme demand. You'll remember I forget which of the fash grifters decided to do that movie, Lady Ballers, and the idea was they were going to self-identify into the WNBA. And that was what the movie was going to be about. And they had to scrap it. They had to come up with a completely new version of the movie because they quickly discovered that's not how it works. There are specific requirements around hormones and stuff. And like testosterone levels before a trans woman is allowed to participate in women's sports. And that's been in place for a very long time now.
That's not a constitutional right, okay?
I mean, wait, equal protection isn't a constitutional right?
But if you try to take away their actual rights, I'm going to fight you.
Wait, I mean, okay, first you said you were against the constitutional right under the 8th Amendment to receive health care if you're incarcerated at state expense. A well-established constitutional right. Then he says it should be legalized to discriminate against trans women in professional sports, an area where trans women have basically no presence because very few actually make the cut or even come anywhere near it, because equal protection is not a constitutional right when it comes to trans people. Trans people don't get equality. I mean, it's a very creative 14th Amendment reading here, but okay, fine. Or is he saying that because that's actually governed by the Civil Rights Act? Like, what? I'm trying to make sense out of a complete nonsense position.
to that end on it, okay? But that idea of they're for other people, Democrats, whether these extreme transpositions...
They're not, like, literally none of the positions, I have to reiterate, that he has pointed out are extreme. They've literally been the status quo for decades. They've literally, nobody can point to any examples of them actually causing any problems, and they've done a lot of good.
Whether it's sometimes criminals, it's such bad framing, Democrats, what are you doing, okay? Or it's corporate goons. They're for them and not for you. And the reason why it resonated so much
is because they're a bunch of fucking racists, and everyone understood that the them is people who aren't rich, white, straight, cis dudes. And the them is this vague Jewish conspiracy that involves, like, black people and women and, like, trans people and queer people and whoever, whatever the fuck. But basically anyone but guys that white nationalists care about, which is to say themselves.
Establishment Democrats have proven over and over again they are for them, not...
You know they're not. Like, I mean, this is such a... The other thing that's ridiculous about this, the healthcare bans. This is discussed in part 1 of the conversation with Corinne Green, which you can find on the YouTube channel. But, okay, the only reason that it was possible for the bans on healthcare for trans youth at state level, bans that have killed people, bans that have caused 260,000 plus internally displaced people in the U.S. as people flee the states that are criminalizing basic life-saving healthcare for trans people to try to get to jurisdictions where they can still access it. The only reason those were able to go into effect is because Joe Biden changed the Obama-era Affordable Care Act non-discrimination regulation to allow them to go into effect. The Democrats, the Democrats literally are taking the position that he's advocating, and they lost the fucking election. That's the wildest thing about this. He's doing this thing, the Democrats should beat the Nazis halfway. That entire fucking election was the Democrats trying to, tell their base to fuck off because they were going to win over moderate Nazis and see there were going to be so many moderate Nazis, it was going to turn out they didn't need their core voters. They didn't, need, like, black people or LGBT people or, like, fucking poor people or whatever because they were going to get the moderate Nazis. So they were already following his exact recommendations, and they got their asses kicked.
Trans people, not black people, not immigrants, but for corporate donors. So they will never, ever listen to the people. That's why...
Notice that he's, like, separating basically all marginalized people from the people.
That commercial resonated so much.
Yeah.
It resonated with very specific people, though.
Plays into a wider narrative, this sort of skepticism or this suspicion that people have. It kind of feels like that might be the case, and then it legitimates any claim that then follows along that same
what does that even mean? Suspicion of what?
The train tracks.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so those two things
Yeah, Zibo, está bueno, le está diciendo todo el texto a lo facho.
collided in a way that was toxic and it ultimately proved fatal for the Democratic chances. And by the way, again on the Young Turks,
I mean, and he's just leaving the genocide out.
What did we say?
And I will say to his credit, they did a not terrible, as mainstream media outlets in the U.S. go, a not terrible job of covering the genocide. And he's just leaving that out. That was a huge issue, it turns out, in the election, and it seems to have been decisive in a number of key states. But that doesn't fit in with this, because then he has to admit that actually, if he were, like, going to be honest about it, he would have to admit that the Democrats abandoned all of these constituencies that he's saying, it's so extreme to support, like black people and queer people and whatever. They abandoned all those constituencies, courted the far right, like he's doing, and committed genocide, which he does not feel is worthy of a mention, even though it was a major issue in the election. And they got their asses kicked, is the thing.
We said, don't go that extreme left. We were right.
Oh, but they didn't go that extreme left. They didn't even go moderately left. They went really hardline to the right, and they lost.
And don't go corporate, and we were right. And so we did that at the risk of losing some of our audience, and we did. We lost some of our paying subscribers.
And the Democrats followed your advice, which actually, it's weird how your advice more or less exactly tracks with what the Democratic Party leadership did in the first place. And they got their asses kicked. I can't say it often enough. He literally, like, what he's proposing is literally what lost, is the campaign the Democrats did, and they lost.
Subscribers, it hurt us
as badly as they've lost in like a generation.
But it matters if you're being honest or not. It matters.
Well, it does. I mean, you would be much more credible, Cenk, if you were being honest. You should try being honest, Cenk.
It matters if you're authentic or not.
You try being authentic too. Be honest, be authentic. Try those things. I mean, as opposed to being a lying shithead.
And so, what I'm hoping for is at the end of the election, that there's three wings of the Democratic Party: the corporate wing, the establishment wing. That's one. They're the dominant ones, unfortunately. That's Biden, Harris, Hillary Clinton, etc.
Yeah, who we're happy to throw trans people under the bus, like Cenk does.
There's the extreme left wing, the identitarian left, etc.
The extreme left wing, which he's not going to give an example.
What right wing would call woke politics.
So, like, anyone who is to the left of the KKK.
And so, but there's a third wing. That's our wing, the populist left.
He's trying to make this thing he's trying to make moderate Nazis Cenk. If that was going to happen, Harris would have won the election, because that's literally who she was going for, the moderate Nazis.
Right?
There aren't moderate Nazis, Cenk.
The Bernie Sanders 2016 take care of the average American wing. So, honestly, that wing was the only one that was correct. The other two wings were totally discredited in this election.
How? I mean, this is just such a ridiculous take. It is really amazing that he can say this with a straight face, because he is describing a campaign that never happened. But it appears to be time to start wrapping up, so I would just like to thank everyone for joining in the stream. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I will be back tomorrow at 11:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. So I look forward to seeing you then.